Professor Riccardo Barontini from the University of Pau et des Pays de l'Adour, where he holds the chair of contemporary eco-poetic issues. He leads a research project, Literary Anthropocene, circulations between experimental sciences and literature in the age of environmental crisis. And his research focused mainly on French contemporary literature, eco-criticism, and digital humanities.
Thanks to Frederick for the invitation. Thank you very much to the colleagues that have spoken this morning. I was particularly interested about what they said about the parallel between biological and linguistic diversity. And of course, thank you to Daniele for his compelling and passionate analysis of the situation, and for this invitation to destroy disciplinary boundaries on that. I'll start from there. So, as Frederick mentioned, I'm a professor of eco-criticism, which means that I work on the relationship between ecological theories, literature, and in the project I'm following, I'm heading right now, experimental sciences. But today, in order to encourage discussion, I won't be giving a rigidly structured talk. Instead, I want to throw out a few key ideas and invite you to think about three fundamental concepts in my discipline, concepts that I believe are crucial for any program like this one, aiming to explore the culture and scientific challenges of our interconnected world. So the three concepts I'll be discussing are posthumanism, biodiversity, and eco-criticism. For each, I'll bring in a short text. And as you'll see, these terms come from quite different domains. Posthumanism is grounded in contemporary philosophy, biodiversity in the natural sciences, and eco-criticism is more closely tied to literary theory. So as we go, we'll be thinking not only about what this concept mean individually, but also how they might relate to one another in light of our current ecological crisis in the age of the Anthropocene, as Daniele really well explained. So let's start with the first terms, which is posthumanism. So this is a philosophical current that has become central in recent years. Let's say, to simplify what is a vast and complex body of work, I'll focus on the thinking of Rosi Braidotti, who is a major figure in the field and a leading advocate of what she called critical posthumanism. So what is it, and what is she critical of? So essentially, Braidotti argues that we need to critique and move beyond the concept of the human, so how we think about ourselves, was inherited from the humanist tradition, the tradition which for centuries placed man at the center of the cosmos as the measure of all things. You have the really famous drawing by Leonardo, the Vitruvian Man, with the man as the measure of all the geometrical figure. And of course, it is really important to acknowledge that humanism brought about major advances in science, philosophy, and rights. But for Braidotti, we are now at the point in the Anthropocene again, where we have to question and go beyond it. So that's why posthumanism. Her critique has two main dimensions. First, she challenges the universalism of the humanist subject. She argues that the man at the center of this tradition is not a universal human, but more of a universalization of a very specific figure, which is white, Western, male, able-bodied. Others, women, racialized people, disabled individuals, have historically been excluded from this model, pushed to the margin, and often associated with nature rather than culture, reinforcing hierarchical binaries that have supported forms of domination. And And second, so it's the first critique, and second, and even more radically, Braidotti critiques anthropocentrism, the idea that humans are the center of the universe and that everything else, every other form of life, exists in relation to us. So this view, according to Braidotti, fails to recognize the complexity of life, that we share this planet with countless other beings, ecosystems, and networks that are deeply interconnected. So posthumanism argues that humans are not separate from the rest of life, of course. We are embedded in the system. And for Braidotti, this is particularly important because she talks about posthumanism as a philosophy of relation, in a way that it shifts focus from the autonomous subject to relationality itself as the center of knowledge. So she said, we are not defined by an isolated essence, but by the networks and relationship that shape us, including relationship with non-human entities like ecosystem or even digital technologies. So I would like to quote a little passage from this book. It's 2019, Posthuman Knowledge, where she explains the way the posthuman subjects are relational subjects. So I quote, posthuman subject establish relations on at least 3 levels, to oneself, to others, and to the world. The world can be defined as a complex set of environmental, social, and affective ecologies. What does it mean to say that subjects are relational? Firstly, that the agency commonly reserved for subjects is not the exclusive prerogative of the anthropos. Secondly, that it is not linked to classical notion of transcendental reason. Thirdly, that it is de-linked from a dialectical view of consciousness based on the opposition of self and others and their struggle for recognition. The knowing subject is not man or anthropos alone, but a more complex assemblage that undoes the boundaries between inside and outside the self by emphasizing processes and flow. So there would be a lot, let's say, to unpack from this quote, but what I want to emphasize is that knowledge and subjectivity in this view are fluid, processual, and collective, and that human figure is one of the actors among many in a much broader system also creating knowledge. And this brings us naturally to the second concept, which is biodiversity. So when we talk about biodiversity, I guess that many of you are already familiar with the term because it has become central in ecological discourse and global activism, so much that so there is a biodiversity COP, you know, the Conference of the United States about Biodiversity, which is in parallel with the climate COP. And there is also a convention by the United Nations about biological diversity. So if you want to draw a definition of biodiversity, we can read what they give to us. The convention defines the biodiversity as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including, among others, terrestrial, marine, and aquatic ecosystem, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystem. So you see, we can say that biodiversity is recognized as having an intrinsic value, not just value for humans, but a value in and of itself. And that's where it aligns beautifully, let's say, with posthumanist thinking, because it insists on an egalitarian and relational vision of life. Biodiversity invites us to recognize the ethical implication of coexistence, to acknowledge the deep entanglement between forms of life and the fragile balances that sustain ecosystem. And on this point of view, I would like to bring in the voice of Baptiste Morisot, who is a major figure in French ecological thought. This book I want to quote is called Manière d'être vivant, which is Ways of Being Alive in English. And the title itself reflects this idea of biodiversity, because there are many different ways of being alive. And one of the main, let's say, theories of this book is that today's ecological crisis is not only biological, technical, of course it is, it's evident, but, says Morisot, it's also a crisis of sensibility, a crisis of the way we relate to this biodiversity. Let's see how he puts it. So this is the quote, yeah, of course. And he says, by crisis of sensibility, I mean an impoverishment of what we can feel, perceive, and understand of living beings and the relation we can weave with them. A reduction in the range of affect, percept, concept, and practices connecting us to them. Then he makes an example. The violence of our belief in nature is manifested in the fact that the songs of birds, crickets, and locusts, song in which we are immersed every summer as soon as we move away from the city center, are experienced in the mythology of modern people as a restful silence. But for whoever seeks to translate them, to release them from being just white noise, they comprise myriads of geopolitical messages, territorial negotiation, serenades of intimidation, games, collective pleasures, challenges laid down, wordless negotiation. The smallest flowery meadow is a caravanserai, cosmopolitan, multilingual, multispecies, and buzzing with activity. It's also quite interesting from a literary point of view, this example, but I would like to say that Morisot insists on the fact that we don't perceive and we don't relate to the richness of biodiversity. We won't be moved to protect this. So it is also, so of course it's a biological problem, it's a political problem, but it's also, in a way, culture problem, which leads us to the final concept I would like to introduce, which is eco-criticism. Eco-criticism, or eco-poetics, is a particular branch I practice, but it's not important. It's the branch of ecological thinking most directly connected to literature and arts. So let's say that it studies how literature can be read through ecological lenses, but also how literature contributes to ecological awareness, how it shapes our sensibility towards the non-human. There's an ongoing debate we could have on this, and I'd be happy to hear your views on a central question: what can literature and, in general, the art do for ecology? How much influence do our culture, representation, and imagination have on our behavior? The question is open. I know some colleagues, they say no influence at all. Personally, I believe that developing tools to read text ecologically with specific attention to non-human can shape our perception of reality. I can experience that in my own research and teaching. But to illustrate that, I would like to read a passage from a really famous novel. It's the Overstory by Richard Powers, which has become something of a touchstone in eco-critical studies. And it's a book from 2018 from the American writer Richard Powers, and from the very title, the Overstory, it's at the same time the idea of the canopy of the trees, also the upper part of the trees, but at the same time the idea of an overarching story that is the story of the trees. And the book itself is structured in a way that mirrors the anatomy of a tree, It's part of roots, trunk, crown, etc. And it is centered on characters whose lives are transformed through their relationship with trees. And I don't remember if it's one of the characters or the narrator say at a certain moment, I quote, "This world is not our world with trees, it's a world of trees where humans had just arrived." So it's a line capturing a profound shift in perspective and what we could say at the centering of the human. So let me read on this point, on this perspective of shifting perspective, one of the most striking passages from the opening pages that I particularly like, because I find that this is particularly clever from a literary point of view. So at the beginning, the book tells a story of a family in the Midwest of the United States who photographs a chestnut tree every month. So they take a picture every month of this a lawn tree for 75 years. This is the last tree survived because there was a sickness, etc., etc. But what's interesting is that at the end, the last descendants have this stack of photos of this tree, and what is captured in those images is not the human drama, but the continuous life of the tree. But what's interesting in this text I will read, it doesn't eliminate the human history, but it puts in perspective by negating it. I'll show the passage so you understand what I mean. The stack grows thicker than any book he has ever tried to read. So this is the last descendants taking the stack of photos. But each photo in the sheaf shows only that lone tree shrugging off the staggering emptiness that the man knows so well. The farm is to Frank's junior backs each time he opened the lens. The photo hides everything. The 20s that do not roar for the holes, the depression that cost them 200 acres and sent half the family to Chicago. The radio shows the ruin too of the Frank's junior son for farming, the whole dead in the South Pacific and the 2 whole guilty survivors, the half dozen adulteries, the 2 divorces sad enough to silence songbirds, the countless ton of chemicals with names like Rage, Roundup, and Firestorm, the patented seed engineer to produce sterile plants, the 50th wedding anniversary in Hawaii and its disastrous aftermath, the dispersal of retirees to Arizona and Texas, the generation of grudge, courage, forbearance, and surprise generosity, everything a human being might call the story happens outside his photo frame. Inside the frame, through hundreds of revolving seasons, there is only that solo tree, its fissured bark spiraling upwards into early middle age, growing at the speed of wood. So what I think is powerful in this passage is how literature can create a temporal and perceptual shift by decentering this human and allowing us to glimpse another kind of life, another kind of storytelling, another temporal scale. Daniele was quoting the book from Avitav Ghosh, who say exactly that we have to think the unthinkable and to change the scale, because in climate change, the classical novel of the 18th century centered on the characters, on a limited amount of time, doesn't work anymore to talk about the ecological crisis. So I want to take more time to conclude. I would like to, rather than leave you with leave you with some questions. So what happens when we take seriously the idea that humans are not separated from but entangled with the rest of the living world? How we can develop a deeper sensibility to biodiversity, not just as a scientific measure, but as a way of perceiving, of feeling, of being? And finally, what can literature and art more broadly do in this context? Can a novel, a poem, a story even just a shift in narrative's perspective help us to see the world in another way. So thank you, and I would love to hear your thoughts.